Good afternoon. This is Anna T. Bellum for Abolition News Network, December 18th, 1865. We are speaking to you from the U.S. Congress. Joining us is a senator from Massachusetts, Henry Wilson, in the celebration of the ratification of the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery forever within the United States. Welcome, Senator Wilson.
A very cordial greeting.
How do you do? I'm so excited. We can finally announce that the end of the evil institution that has enslaved an entire race, nearly ruining our country and its basic principles ever since the beginning in 1776. Could you give us the story of how this amendment evolved and who first put it forward?
This is interesting. As a member of the House and Senate proposed a bill about the same time. Mr. Ashley of Ohio in the House on 14 December 1863, and Senator Henderson of Missouri on 14 January 1864. It was the Senate bill after an enormous amount of debate that was passed.
Wow, amazing. Great minds do think alike. What did you say when it was proposed?
Well, I'm glad you asked. After the opening, I stood up after Mr. Trumbull and gave this speech. I have it right here. This crowning act in this series of acts for the restriction and extinction of slavery in America is this proposed amendment to the Constitution, prohibiting the existence of slavery forevermore in the Republic of the United States. If this amendment shall be incorporated by the will of the nation into the Constitution of the United States, it will obliterate the last lingering vestiges of the slave system. And I went on to explain that fact for the next 10 to 15 minutes. I would also like to add another Congressman, Mr. Arnold of Illinois, who saw the greater significance of the amendment, who said, "Never since the day when John Adams pleaded for the Declaration of Independence has so important a question been submitted to an American Congress as that upon which you are now about to vote."
Wow, so it must have passed right away.
Well, no, it was actually destined to receive determined and violent opposition from those who still believed in slavery and adhered to it. Let me give you some examples. Garrett Davis pleaded for impunity of his cherished system and gave a long and fiery speech predicting mob violence as a result of such legislation. Mr. Salisbury, no less extreme, defended slavery from the scriptures, claiming it had the sanction of God and his apostles. Mr. Hendricks of Indiana said the government had nothing to do with the moral aspects of slavery, and they, the Negroes, will never associate with the white people of this country on terms of equality. Fiercer opposition was in the House, and most extreme were Northern Democrats like Fernando Wood of New York City. He insisted the measure was beyond the power of the government. It involved the extermination of Southern white men and the forfeiture of their land and property, and the Negroes taking the place of their race. Mr. Pendleton of Ohio, a states' rights extremist, declared that neither Congress nor the country could abolish slavery in a single state because it lies within the domain reserved entirely only for the state.
Well, there must have been something about slavery that would look good for the country.
Well, yes, I'll give you three. Mr. Schofield of Pennsylvania. Slavery must die now by a constitutional amendment, a single stroke of the axe, or it shall linger on in party warfare. Mr. Jenks of Rhode Island. It is the corpse of our dead enemy, speaking of slavery. Let us bury it quickly and with as little ceremony as possible, that the foul odor of its rotted carcass may no longer offend us and the world. And finally, Mr. McAllister of Pennsylvania. I cast my vote against the cornerstone of the Confederacy and declare eternal war against the enemies of my country. Well, before I conclude, I'd like to read the statement from my colleague in the House, the most radical abolitionist of them all, Thaddeus Stevens, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, who eloquently stated, "I have not forgotten in my enfeebling age my hatred of slavery and love of liberty, influenced by the inspired teachings of Socrates and the divine inspiration of Jesus, and I expressed my willingness to take my chances in the coming estimate of posterity and my epitaph that I had striven to ameliorate the conditions of the poor, the lowly, the downtrodden of every race and language and color.
All right. Well, before we get to voting, I have one more question. Did the president do anything to influence congressmen at this point?
Well, I'll say, in December, he lobbied the slaveholding congressman from Missouri, James S. Rollins, who had previously voted against the amendment, by convincing him that by passing it, it would shorten the war. If the border states were to unite to pass the amendment, then the other fellows down south would see that they would not get any help from them, and they would give up and quit their war against the government. Rollins agreed. Then Lincoln asked him to convince his other colleagues to follow suit, and he did. And I understand that President Lincoln also called on a wealthy financier, Abel Corbin, formerly from Missouri, living in New York, to get some New York votes.
So he was very involved. So how did the votes turn out?
The Senate had passed it, but the first time around in the House, there was not the necessary two-thirds majority to pass. So a joint committee was called for a vote to reconsider, and that was taken on the 28th of January. It was 119 in favor, 56 opposed, and 8 abstained. So it passed the two-thirds by 2 votes. President Lincoln signed it on January 30th, and then it went to the states for ratification. Today it was announced that the required 3/4 of the states had signed it. So the 13th Amendment is now part of our Constitution. Oh, and by the way, the first state to ratify was Illinois, President Lincoln's own state. May I give a speech now?
Yeah, if you must. This is certainly one of the most important events since the Declaration of Independence.
However effected, the great change was made, and now the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, no longer at variance, give utterance to the same great truths of human liberty, fraternity, equality. Although there may be grounds that the amendment did not fairly represent opinions of many individuals, its enactment was a great gain to the cause of humanity and good government. Although the tendency of the public sentiment was dragging the convictions of the people down to a low level, all this is now changed. The gain is therefore immense, and it gives the Negro and his friends high vantage ground in the conflict still in progress. Public sentiment may not yet be fully up to its proper enforcement, but the tendency, it is a source of comfort and courage toward it. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction.
Wow, what an impressive speech. Thank you, Senator Wilson. This is Anna T. Bellum for Abolition News Network saying, welcome to a new age of freedom.